Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a small, unassuming Viking village. Picture it now, the smoke curling lazily from turf roofs, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the crisp air, the smell of wood smoke and damp earth clinging to everything. You're there, huddled by a crackling fire, the long night stretching out before you. But here's the kicker. The unspoken truth that hums beneath the surface of every seemingly ordinary day, you probably wouldn't last a single week. Not because of a raiding party or a harsh winter, but because of something far more insidious, a pervasive, quiet dread that gnawed at the edges of daily life, the mischievous, unpredictable shadow of Loki. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, maybe let me know your location and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine waking up. The pale northern light barely piercing the small opening in your longhouse. You stretch, a deep yawn escaping your lips, and as you do, your eyes drift to the small hand-carved amulet hanging above your sleeping furs. It's not for show, you know. It's a silent, daily plea for protection, a tiny barrier against the unseen forces that constantly threaten your precarious existence. Because in this world, every unexplained misfortune, every tiny hiccup in the rhythm of life could be traced back to one trickster god, Loki. It wasn't like you were constantly looking over your shoulder, muttering curses at the sky. No, it was far more subtle than that. It was the background hum of unease, the nagging what if that accompanied nearly every task. You might be carefully laying out your fishing nets, checking for tears, and suddenly a thought would prickle. What if Loki tangles them tonight? What if he pulls the fish away, just for a laugh? It sounds a bit paranoid, doesn't it? But for the Viking villager, this wasn't paranoia. It was a deeply ingrained cultural understanding of their world. The gods weren't distant, abstract concepts. They were living, breathing entities, often just as flawed and temperamental as humans, if not more so. And Loki, well, he was the embodiment of chaos, the ultimate wild card. Consider for a moment the very fabric of your community. Life here is a tightrope walk. Every harvest, every successful hunt, every birth is a hard-won victory against the harsh elements. There's no room for error, no safety net. And then there's Loki, a being who delights in upsetting the balance. It's not about grand cataclysmic events every day, though those certainly happened in the sagas. No, it's about the small, infuriating, truly unexplainable things. You might spend hours repairing a crucial piece of your farming equipment, making sure every joint is strong, every strap secure. You put it down, turn your back for a moment, and when you return, a vital piece is missing. Not lost, not simply misplaced, but gone. And who else could do that? Who else but the one who could walk through walls, change his form, and delight in the sheer frustration of mortals? This everyday unease wasn't just about things going wrong. It was about the feeling of being played with. Imagine you're trying to gather medicinal herbs, carefully identifying each plant, remembering the lore passed down through generations. You reach for a specific root, and just as your fingers touch it, a sudden gust of wind whips through the forest, scattering dried leaves and making you lose your grip. You search and search, but the root is nowhere to be found. A natural occurrence, perhaps? Or was it Loki, invisible, chuckling somewhere in the rustling branches, amused by your futile efforts? It's these tiny, seemingly insignificant moments that build up, a steady drip of low-level anxiety. The fascinating thing about Loki's influence on daily life wasn't just his direct actions, but the way his reputation permeated the very language and superstitions. If a child tripped over nothing, you might hear an elder murmur about Loki's unseen foot. If milk soured too quickly or bread failed to rise, the whisper of the trickster was never far. This wasn't just a convenient scapegoat, though it certainly served that purpose sometimes. It was a genuine belief that this particular god enjoyed disrupting the natural order, purely for the sport of it. It's like having that one friend who just has to mess with you, but on a cosmic scale, and with actual consequences for your survival. You know, the one who hides your car keys just before a big meeting, except instead of car keys, it's your entire winter food supply, a real laugh riot. This constant awareness meant that you, as a Viking villager, developed a sort of hyper-vigilance, an almost unconscious scanning of your surroundings for anything out of place. Did that axe head just come loose a bit too easily? Did that rope fray at an unusually fast rate? It made you double-check, triple-check. There was an unspoken agreement that if something went wrong and there was no obvious human explanation, then Loki was the most likely culprit. It was a way of making sense of a world that was already unpredictable, a way of fitting the unexplainable into a known, albeit unsettling framework. Think about the simple act of lighting a fire. A seemingly straightforward task, but one absolutely crucial for warmth, cooking, and light. You'd carefully arrange the kindling, strike your flint, and coax the flame to life. But if the wood was inexplicably damp, if the sparks refused to catch, if the smoke stung your eyes more than usual, a tiny seed of doubt would be planted. Is Loki playing games with my fire? Is he trying to leave us cold tonight? This kind of doubt, repeated countless times throughout a lifetime, fostered a deep-seated, though often unspoken apprehension. It wasn't a fear that paralyzed you, but a subtle undercurrent that colored your perception of everyday events. It was the world's original user error, except the user was a god. This also meant that any unexpected stroke of good fortune was often met with a slight suspicion, a hesitant joy. If your hunt yielded an unusually large deer, or a storm passed by without damage, there was a fleeting thought, is this real, or is Loki setting us up for something worse later? It's like finding $100 bill on the street, and your first thought is, who dropped this, and what's the catch? That level of skepticism, but applied to the divine. This constant interplay of fear and suspicion, even against the backdrop of mundane tasks, truly highlights the unique psychological landscape of a Viking villager. You wake with the sun, the chill of the morning still clinging to the air, but your mind is already on the fields. Today, like many days recently, is about the harvest. It's the most crucial time of the year, the period that determines whether your family, your entire village, will eat through the long, brutal winter. You can practically taste the desperation in the air, a mix of hope and gnawing anxiety. Every hand is needed, from the smallest child gathering dropped stalks to the strongest warrior swinging a scythe. And as you step out, the dew-kissed field stretching before you, a familiar thought creeps in. Please, not today, Loki. The fear of Loki spoiling the harvest wasn't some abstract theological debate. It was a very real, tangible dread that impacted every swing of your scythe, every bundle of grain you tied. You see, the Viking world, for all its fierce warriors and grand sagas, was fundamentally an agrarian society. Most people, like you, were farmers. Your survival hinged on the success of your crops. Barley for bread and ale, oats for porridge, rye for hearty sustenance. A bad harvest wasn't just a disappointment. It was a death sentence for some, a winter of gnawing hunger for many. So, when the first blight appeared, or an unexpected, unseasonable frost nipped at the young shoots, your mind immediately leaped to the trickster. Imagine the scene. You're out in the field, the sun warm on your back, the rhythmic swish of the scythe a comforting sound. You're working alongside your neighbors, a sense of shared purpose binding you together. Suddenly, you notice a patch of grain, inexplicably withered, its stalks brittle and brown, even though the surrounding plants are lush and green. You kneel, examining it closely. No obvious pest, no sign of disease that you recognize. Just dead. A shiver runs down your spine. Was it just bad luck? Or was Loki perhaps walking unseen through your fields, touching the plants with his cold, mischievous fingers, just to watch your face fall? It's these small, localized disasters that truly tested your resolve and fed the legend of his interference. The mainstream historical fact here is that crop failures were incredibly common in the Viking Age due to unpredictable weather, limited agricultural technology, and a lack of scientific understanding of plant diseases. But for you, the villager, these failures weren't just bad luck or poor soil. They were often imbued with divine meaning. If the spring rains were too heavy, washing away seeds, or if a sudden hailstorm flattened your emerging crops, it wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a sign that perhaps you had offended the gods, or more specifically, that Loki was in one of his moods. And his moods, as you well knew, could be devastating. The quirky tidbit: well, some sagas hint at Loki having a particular fondness for apples, perhaps even stealing them from the god's own orchards. While this doesn't directly relate to grain, it paints a picture of a god who would absolutely, without a second thought, mess with your food supply, just for the sheer enjoyment of it. Imagine, you've got a small apple tree, a rare treat in your northern climate, carefully nurtured. You go out one morning, ready to pick the first ripe fruit, and find it stripped bare. Not by birds or animals, but with an unnatural neatness, almost as if someone had just taken them. No footprints, no broken branches, just empty boughs. You'd sigh, shake your head, and mutter something under your breath about that blasted son of a giant. The anxiety wasn't just about the immediate loss. It was about the ripple effect. A poor grain harvest meant less flour for bread, which meant less food for your family. Less grain also meant less to brew into ale, a staple drink that provided calories, hydration, and a bit of cheer in a hard life. And if you couldn't brew ale, well, that was a truly depressing thought. It's like your modern-day equivalent of your internet going out right before your favorite streaming show. But instead of missing an episode, you're missing dinner for 3 months. Not quite the same, is it? You'd hear stories from other villages, travelers passing through, tales of inexplicable misfortunes befalling their crops. A field of flax, ready for harvest, suddenly turning to brittle dust. A patch of turnips, inexplicably rotting underground before they could be pulled. These weren't just cautionary tales. They were confirmations of Loki's pervasive influence. Each story added another layer to the collective dread, reinforcing the idea that no harvest was truly safe until it was safely stored away in the longhouse. This constant vigilance extended to every stage of the agricultural cycle. Planting seeds in the spring, you'd offer a small prayer to Freyr, god of fertility, but also a quick, almost apologetic thought to Loki, just in case he was listening. Tending the fields in summer, you'd watch for signs of blight, but also for any strange patterns in the growth, any inexplicable patches of stunted plants. It was an exhausting mental burden, this constant negotiation with the unseen. Even the weather, which was already a terrifyingly unpredictable force, became intertwined with Loki's potential for mischief. A sudden unseasonal drought, Loki surely withholding the life-giving rains. A torrential downpour that flooded your fields, Loki delighting in your misery.
It was a way of personifying the immense, uncontrollable forces of nature, giving them a face, even if that face was a sneering, unpredictable one. You couldn't fight the weather, but you could, perhaps, try to appease the god who might be manipulating it. And then there were the rituals, the small daily acts of appeasement. You might leave a tiny offering of milk or a piece of bread near the edge of your field, not necessarily for a benevolent god, but almost as a bribe for Loki. Here, Loki, a little something for you. Now, please leave my barley alone. It's like leaving out cookies for Santa, but instead of getting presents, you're just hoping he doesn't trash your house. Lower stakes, but higher consequences. The collective anxiety around the harvest also fostered a strong sense of community. When a neighbor's crop failed, it was a shared sorrow, for it impacted everyone. You might lend a hand, share what little you had, because you knew that next season it could be your field that Loki decided to target. This shared vulnerability, this common enemy in the form of divine mischief, paradoxically strengthened the bonds between villagers. You were all in this together, facing down the unpredictable whims of a trickster god. And in a world where survival was a daily struggle, that sense of solidarity was a powerful comfort, even if it didn't stop Loki from doing his thing.
The sun dips lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and you finally head back to your longhouse, weary from a day of endless chores. As you step inside, the familiar smells of wood smoke and simmering stew offer a brief respite. But even here, within the supposed safety of your home, Loki's shadow could stretch. Tonight, perhaps, it manifests in the anxious glance you give to your small flock of chickens scratching in their pen, or the low murmur of your neighbor complaining about a cow that's suddenly stopped giving milk. Because next to the harvest, the well-being of your livestock was paramount, and these precious animals were just as susceptible to the trickster god's whims. For a Viking villager like yourself, animals weren't just pets. They were living capital, walking larders, mobile sources of warmth, clothing, and even currency. Your sheep provided wool for textiles, meat for the table, and milk for cheese. Your goats were hardy milk producers, perfect for the rugged landscape. Cattle offered meat, milk, and invaluable hides. And pigs, well, pigs were often seen as a sign of prosperity, their fat and meat crucial for surviving the lean months. Losing even one animal, especially a pregnant ewe or a good milk cow, was a significant economic blow, a stark reminder of your precarious existence. And when these losses were inexplicable, when a healthy animal simply sickened and died overnight or vanished without a trace, the whisper of Loki inevitably followed. Imagine you're out tending to your small herd of goats, their bells clinking softly as they graze on the tough northern grasses. You count them carefully, a mental tally you do several times a day. All 12 are there. You turn your back for a moment to mend a fence post, and when you look again, there are only 11. You search, calling out, scanning the familiar landscape. No sign of a struggle, no tracks leading away, just gone. Your mind immediately jumps to a wolf, a bear, but your gut tells you something else. Was Loki playing a game of hide and seek with my livelihood? Did he simply decide to snatch one away just to watch me fret? This wasn't about a predator. It was about a malevolent, unseen hand. A mainstream historical fact is that animal husbandry in the Viking Age was challenging. Diseases, harsh winters, and predation from wild animals like wolves and bears were constant threats to livestock. But again, for you, these natural occurrences were often filtered through the lens of divine intervention. If a whole flock of sheep suddenly developed a mysterious illness that your most experienced healer couldn't cure, it wasn't just the sickness.
It was Loki, perhaps poisoning the pastures with invisible toxins or whispering dark spells into the night air. The lack of any obvious explanation made it all the more terrifying. Because how do you fight something you can't see, something that defies earthly understanding? Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Nordic folklore, Loki was sometimes associated with flies or other small annoying insects, capable of spreading mischief and disease. Now imagine a swarming cloud of flies around your cow, irritating it, making it restless, perhaps even leading to a minor injury. You swat them away, frustrated, but then you pause. Are these just ordinary flies? Or is this Loki, in his minuscule form, orchestrating a tiny, irritating rebellion in my cowshed? It's a silly thought, perhaps, but one that fits the pattern of his petty, pervasive interference. He wasn't always about grand, cosmic battles. Sometimes his tricks were just annoying, but with potentially dire consequences. The fear wasn't just about losing an animal. It was about the timing of the loss. If your only milk cow died just as winter was setting in, leaving your children without a vital source of nutrition, the despair would be immense. And that despair would be compounded by the knowledge that this might not have been an accident, but a deliberate act of cruelty from a god who relished suffering. It's like your perfectly tuned car breaking down the morning of a big job interview, but instead of calling roadside assistance, you're left wondering which mischievous deity decided to yank out a spark plug just for kicks. You'd hear stories, of course, from neighboring farms, tales that sent shivers down your spine. A farmer's prize boar, inexplicably found tangled in its own tether, suffocated, despite the rope being perfectly sound. A flock of geese, vital for their eggs and meat, suddenly vanishing into thin air, leaving no tracks, no feathers, nothing. These were the moments when the community would gather, sharing their anxieties, nodding grimly as someone inevitably whispered, "Loki's hand." These weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, a cosmic game of chance where Loki held all the loaded dice. This constant threat meant that you, as a villager, would go to extraordinary lengths to protect your animals. You might reinforce your pens with stronger timber, build higher fences, or even try to sleep near the animals during critical times like lambing season. You'd also offer small, regular sacrifices or blessings, not just to the benevolent gods like Frey or Thor, who might protect your herds, but sometimes, subtly, to Loki himself. A small piece of meat left at a crossroads, a splash of ale poured into the ground, a whispered prayer for peace in your barn. It's like performing a complex ritual every morning just to ensure your Wi-Fi stays connected. You know it's a bit much, but the consequences of not doing it are just too dire. The psychological toll of this constant anxiety about your animals was significant. It added another layer of stress to an already demanding life. Every cough from a sheep, every unusual whimper from a dog could trigger a brief moment of panic. You became hyper-attuned to the well-being of your livestock, not just out of care, but out of a desperate need to preempt any potential mischief from Loki. This deep, almost familiar bond with your animals was tinged with a constant undercurrent of fear, a fear that at any moment they could be taken from you, not by a natural predator, but by an invisible, laughing force. This was the quiet dread that permeated your days, a shadow lurking in every stable and every pasture.
As you gather your tools from the stable, the wind picks up outside, rattling the turf roof. You glance nervously toward the small opening that serves as your window, seeing only a blur of gray sky. A chill seeps into your bones, not just from the cold, but from the instinctive dread that accompanies any sudden shift in the elements. Because in your world, the weather wasn't just a force of nature, it was often viewed a direct manifestation of divine will. And when it turned unexpectedly harsh or bizarre, the prime suspect for its erratic behavior was often none other than Loki. Living in a Viking village meant you were intimately connected to the weather. Your entire life, from planting to sailing, from hunting to building, was dictated by the sky. A good summer meant abundant harvests. A harsh winter could mean starvation. You knew the signs, could read the clouds, predict the subtle shifts in wind direction with an instinct honed over generations. But sometimes something would happen that defied all your experience, all your traditional wisdom. A sudden, unseasonable blizzard in late spring, destroying fragile crops. A weeks-long drought during the peak growing season, turning fertile fields to dust. These weren't just bad luck, they felt orchestrated, a cruel joke played by an unseen hand. And Loki, with his penchant for chaos and disruption, was the most obvious candidate for such celestial mischief. Imagine you're preparing for a short journey to a neighboring fjord, perhaps to trade some furs for salt. The morning dawns clear and bright, the sea calm and inviting. You pack your small boat, your heart light with the promise of a successful trip. You push off, feeling the familiar pull of the oars, the gentle rocking of the waves. Then, almost out of nowhere, the sky darkens. A violent squall descends, whipping the water into a frenzy and threatening to capsize your sturdy craft. You fight against the sudden furious winds, your muscles burning, your mind racing. Was this a genuine storm? Or was Loki, perhaps, conjuring it just for the thrill of watching you struggle, delighting in your terror as you fought for your life against the sudden, unnatural tempest? It's this unnerving unpredictability, this feeling of being toyed with, that truly makes his influence so insidious. A mainstream historical fact here is that the climate in Scandinavia during the Viking Age was indeed highly variable, with periods of warmer temperatures followed by colder, harsher spells, a phenomenon known as the medieval climate anomaly and the subsequent Little Ice Age. These climatic shifts led to significant challenges for agriculture and navigation. But for you, the villager, unaware of complex atmospheric patterns or long-term climate cycles, such drastic changes were bewildering and often attributed to divine caprice. If the summer was inexplicably cold, causing your barley to barely ripen, it wasn't just global cooling, it was the trickster blowing icy breaths from his home in Jotunheimer. And for a quirky tidbit, some Norse sagas and poems depict Loki as having a connection to fire, specifically wild, destructive fire, even being the father of a fire giant. Now think about that connection. Imagine a period of drought, the ground parched, the forests dry as tinder. You live in constant fear of a runaway spark. Then, one night, a sudden, inexplicable flash of lightning ignites a distant patch of woods, and the resulting blaze threatens your village. A natural phenomenon? Perhaps. But in the anxious minds of the villagers, it could easily be Loki, not just controlling the winds and rains, but wielding destructive fire. Perhaps even enjoying the panicked flight of the local fauna and the fear in human hearts. It fits his chaotic persona perfectly. The anxiety around weather wasn't just about survival, it was also about logistics and planning. You couldn't build a new longhouse if the rains never stopped. You couldn't smoke your fish if the air remained stubbornly damp. Every aspect of your daily life, from drying hides to mending nets, depended on cooperative weather. When it turned against you, especially without warning, it felt like a personal affront, a deliberate sabotage. It's like planning a massive outdoor event, meticulously checking the forecast, only for a freak, unpredicted thunderstorm to roll in precisely when the first band is about to play. You wouldn't just be annoyed, you'd be looking for the universe's hidden camera crew.
The stories circulated, of course, reinforcing the belief in Loki's weather-wielding abilities. Tales of fishing boats caught in sudden violent squalls that appeared from a clear sky, only to vanish as quickly as they came, leaving survivors traumatized and bewildered. Legends of fields being pounded by hailstones the size of a fist, even as neighboring areas remained untouched. These weren't just cautionary tales of nature's power, they were evidence for you that Loki enjoyed playing with the very fabric of your world, treating it like his own personal toy box. This pervasive fear of erratic weather, often linked to Loki, also manifested in specific rituals and offerings. While Thor was generally seen as the god of thunder and storms, benevolent in his protection, any unusual storm or destructive weather might prompt offerings specifically aimed at appeasing the trickster. You might pour out a small libation of ale on the ground before a long journey, or tie a protective knot in a rope as you watched storm clouds gather, hoping to subtly divert Loki's attention, to remind him that you were just a humble human trying to make your way. It was a desperate plea for a moment of peace, a quiet acknowledgement of his immense and terrifying power over the very air you breathed. The psychological burden of this constant meteorological vigilance was immense. You learned to live with the unpredictability of the northern climate, but when that unpredictability veered into the inexplicable, when storms seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly, leaving behind a trail of destruction, it fostered a deep-seated helplessness. You could plan, you could work hard, but ultimately your fate often lay in the hands of the gods, and particularly in the unpredictable whims of a trickster who found amusement in your discomfort. This constant background hum of anxiety, this gnawing uncertainty about what the sky might drop on you next, was a pervasive fear that touched every single day of your life in that small Viking village.
The wind howls a mournful tune outside, and you pull your woolen cloak tighter around you. Inside the longhouse, the fire crackles, casting dancing shadows on the faces of your family and neighbors gathered around. Tonight, a dispute flares up between two trading partners over a mismatched delivery of hides. Voices grow sharp, accusations fly, and for a moment the tension is palpable. You sigh inwardly, because while everyday squabbles are normal, sometimes, when arguments felt particularly irrational or escalated far too quickly, you couldn't help but wonder if Loki, the master manipulator, was stirring up village disputes just for his amusement. Life in a Viking village was, by necessity, communal. You relied on each other for everything: protection, labor, knowledge, and even companionship. Disputes, of course, were inevitable. Someone's pig might wander into a neighbor's garden, or a shared fishing spot might be trespassed upon. These were problems that could usually be resolved by the local assembly, the thing, or through the wisdom of the elders. But then there were the other kinds of arguments, the ones that seemed to erupt from nothing, fueled by irrational anger, spreading through the community like wildfire. When misunderstandings spiraled into bitter feuds, or when perfectly reasonable people suddenly became stubborn and spiteful, your mind often drifted to Loki. He was, after all, the ultimate instigator of discord, the god who delighted in sowing chaos among both gods and mortals. Imagine a perfectly normal market day. You're haggling good-naturedly over the price of a finely crafted brooch, enjoying the lively atmosphere. Suddenly, across the way, a heated argument erupts between two men who have always been civil, even friendly. One accuses the other of cheating on a previous trade, a claim that seems utterly baseless to everyone listening. The accusations escalate rapidly, words turning to threats, and soon hands are on weapon hilts. It feels out of proportion, almost unnatural. Was it simply a misunderstanding? Or was Loki, unseen, whispering poisons into their ears, twisting their perceptions, planting seeds of mistrust where none existed moments before? It's the feeling of a calm pond suddenly boiling with no visible source of heat.
A mainstream historical fact is that resolving disputes was a crucial aspect of Viking Age society, with a strong emphasis on established legal systems and communal assemblies like the Things to maintain order and prevent blood feuds. These gatherings were central to social cohesion. However, despite these structures, human nature being what it is, conflicts still arose. For you, the villager, while the thing might address the visible outcome of a dispute, it couldn't explain its cause when it seemed utterly illogical. If two respected elders, known for their wisdom and fairness, suddenly found themselves locked in a petty, seemingly unresolvable quarrel over a trivial matter, it felt like more than just human stubbornness. Here's a quirky tidbit. Loki is often associated with shape-shifting and disguise, a master of illusion. Now, consider a scenario where a rumor starts circulating through the village, a malicious whisper that turns friend against friend. But no one can quite trace its origin. It just appeared. Was it simply gossip? Or was it Loki, perhaps disguised as a common sparrow, flitting from eave to eave, dropping poisonous little tidbits into susceptible ears? Or perhaps he merely plants the idea in someone's mind, a subtle suggestion that festers into outright suspicion. It's the ultimate who started it mystery, where the answer is always the mischievous deity. The dread of Loki's hand in village disputes wasn't just about the unpleasantness of an argument. It was about the potential for fragmentation, for the tearing apart of the social fabric. A strong community was your best defense against the harsh world, against raids, against starvation. If internal strife weakened those bonds, it left everyone more vulnerable. A minor squabble over a lost axe could, if Loki truly put his mind to it, escalate into a full-blown family feud that simmered for generations, threatening the very survival of the village. It's like when a tiny disagreement on a group chat spirals into a massive passive-aggressive war, but instead of just unfriending someone, you might end up with actual axes involved. Much higher stakes, wouldn't you agree? You'd notice the subtle signs. A usually calm person suddenly becoming irrationally angry. A normally fair person refusing to compromise on a trivial point. When reason seemed to abandon people, when logic flew out the window, that's when the quiet murmurings of Loki's work would begin. You might try to mediate, to calm the waters, but you'd also be wary, sensing that unseen presence fueling the flames of discord. It made you question things, made you a little more guarded, even with those you trusted. The stories of Loki's mischief among the gods themselves served as constant reminders of his capabilities. Didn't he trick Hodr into killing Balder, the most beloved of all gods? Didn't he constantly sow seeds of distrust and animosity among the Asir and Vanir? If he could cause such catastrophic division among literal deities, what chance did mere mortals like you have against his subtle, insidious influence? It was a chilling thought, knowing that your peaceful village could, at any moment, become his personal playground for social experiments. To combat this, people would often engage in rituals aimed at promoting harmony and clear-headedness before important communal gatherings or negotiations. Offerings might be made to gods like Forseti, the god of justice and reconciliation, to ensure fairness and peace during the thing. But even then, there was that underlying apprehension, that lingering suspicion that Loki might still find a way to twist the words, to muddy the waters, to turn good intentions into bitter resentment. It's like having a perfectly planned meeting agenda, but knowing there's a saboteur in the room whose sole purpose is to derail everything, for shiggles. The psychological impact of this pervasive belief in Loki's role in disputes was that it added an extra layer of caution to every social interaction. You learned to be watchful not just for human malice, but for divine manipulation. It subtly encouraged you to try and de-escalate conflicts, not just for practical reasons, but out of a deeper fear of wittingly becoming a pawn in Loki's grand game of human misery. This constant awareness of the trickster's potential influence on your community, making even small disagreements feel fraught with deeper unseen danger, was a quiet, unsettling presence in the heart of your Viking village.
The sun climbs higher, and you're back to the demanding rhythm of your day. As you carry a heavy bucket of water from the well, your foot slips on a loose stone. You brace yourself, dropping the bucket with a splash, and manage to catch your balance before a nasty fall. Your heart pounds, and as you stoop to retrieve the now empty bucket, a familiar, unsettling thought crosses your mind. Was that just clumsiness, or was Loki giving me a gentle nudge towards a broken ankle? Because in a world where every step was potentially perilous, any sudden, inexplicable personal misfortune often carried the silent accusation of the trickster god's involvement. In your Viking life, there was little room for error. A sprained ankle could mean you couldn't work the fields. A deep cut could lead to infection and death. And a misplaced tool could cripple your ability to provide. There were no doctors with sterile instruments, no readily available painkillers, no safety nets like disability benefits. Survival was a daily grind, a constant negotiation with a harsh environment. So when something went wrong that seemed too odd to be mere chance, a perfectly sharpened axe blade chipping for no reason, a freshly mended tunic tearing inexplicably, a fire suddenly flaring up and scorching your hand, it wasn't just an accident, it was a sign. And more often than not, that sign pointed to Loki. Imagine you're meticulously carving a handle for a new tool. Your knife sharp, your movements precise. You've done this countless times, your hands knowing the wood intimately. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the knife slips. Not just a little, but enough to slice a painful gash across your thumb. You gasp, clenching your fist, blood welling up. You examine the knife, the wood. Nothing seems out of place. It wasn't your fault, you think. Not really. Did Loki just nudge my hand, enjoying the sudden pain, the ruined work, the frustration in my eyes? It's the feeling of being tripped by an invisible rope, a sensation that leaves you questioning your own competence, your own control over your limbs. A mainstream historical fact here is that life in the Viking Age was fraught with everyday dangers. Injuries from tools, accidents during farming or hunting, and the general lack of modern medical care meant that even minor mishaps could have severe consequences. Life expectancy was significantly lower than today, partly due to the prevalence of such personal misfortunes. But for you, the villager, the psychological framework often provided a divine explanation for these otherwise random occurrences. If your child suddenly developed a mysterious fever that no traditional remedy could break, it wasn't just a childhood illness. It was Loki, perhaps, visiting them with a debilitating sickness, simply because he could. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Nordic tales describe Loki's children, like the monstrous wolf Fenrir or the world serpent Jormungandr, causing widespread chaos. While these are grand cosmic threats, a smaller, more personal connection could be drawn. Imagine you're out gathering berries and you find a patch ripe for picking. As you reach for them, a small, unusually aggressive snake darts out, biting your hand. A common occurrence in the wilderness? Perhaps. But if that snake's eyes seemed a little too intelligent, its movement a little too deliberate, you might wonder if Loki hadn't sent one of his more minor venomous offspring, or perhaps even taken on the form of the snake himself, just to inflict a moment of pain and fear. It's like discovering that your coffee machine breaks down every morning, but only your coffee machine, and you just know it's not a faulty circuit. It's personal. The dread of Loki's hand in personal misfortunes wasn't just about the physical pain. It was about the feeling of being vulnerable, of having your personal well-being subject to the arbitrary whims of a higher power.
It meant that even the simplest, most mundane tasks carried a faint undercurrent of risk, a constant alertness for the unexpected twist, the inexplicable snag. You might check your laces twice, test the strength of a branch before climbing, or examine your tools with a heightened sense of scrutiny, all because you knew Loki was out there, potentially waiting for a moment of inattention to strike. You'd hear stories, too, of others' sudden misfortunes, tales that reinforced your own fears. A skilled weaver suddenly losing her eyesight for no discernible reason. A strong young man inexplicably developing a limp after walking on what seemed like solid ground. These weren't just tragedies. They were interpreted as direct interventions, proof of Loki's constant subtle interference in individual lives. Each story added another layer to the collective unease, solidifying the belief that no one was truly safe from his unpredictable mischief. This constant awareness meant that you, as a Viking villager, might also engage in private, personal rituals to ward off Loki's influence. Before embarking on a difficult task, you might discreetly trace a protective rune on the tool, or murmur a small, almost imperceptible prayer to a more benevolent god, hoping their attention might shield you from Loki's gaze. It's like doing a little superstitious dance before a big presentation, not because you truly believe it will change the outcome, but because it makes you feel like you've done something. The psychological burden of this constant threat to your personal well-being was subtle but pervasive. It instilled a form of hypervigilance, making you acutely aware of your surroundings, your tools, and your own body. You learned to live with a certain fatalism, accepting that some things were simply beyond your control, but also with a lingering suspicion that behind every inexplicable stumble or frustrating setback, there might be a grinning, invisible God enjoying your discomfort. This quiet anxiety, this constant awareness of being potentially targeted for a moment of divine amusement, was a defining feature of your daily life in that small, enduring Viking village.
The familiar creak of the longhouse door as a lone traveler enters sends a ripple of curious murmurs through the room. He's weary, his clothes dusty from a long journey, and as he accepts a bowl of stew, he begins to tell tales of the road. You listen intently, always eager for news from beyond your fjord, but also with a quiet apprehension. Because travelers' treachery, the dangers and deceptions encountered on journeys, were often attributed to Loki's influence, making even the promise of new goods or information fraught with potential peril. In the Viking world, travel was essential but incredibly dangerous. Whether by land or sea, journeys were long, arduous, and fraught with both natural and human threats. You relied on trade for goods your village couldn't produce, and on news from afar to understand the wider world. Messengers carried vital information, and merchants brought exotic wares. But every time someone left the safety of your village, or someone unknown arrived, there was an inherent risk. And when tales of betrayal, misdirection, or inexplicable disappearances emerged, the finger often pointed to Loki, the master of deceit, the god who delighted in leading mortals astray. Imagine your trusted cousin setting off on a trading expedition to a distant settlement, promising to return with vital iron tools. Days turn into weeks, then months, long past his expected arrival. You start to worry, envisioning perils, a storm at sea, a bandit attack. But then a rumor trickles back. He was seen in a far-off village, not trading, but gambling away his goods, acting strangely, even hostilely, completely out of character. He returns eventually, empty-handed, with a vague, unbelievable story of being misled and confused. Was it merely a change of heart, a moment of weakness? Or was Loki, perhaps subtly clouding his judgment, weaving illusions of false opportunities, tempting him into ruin just for the sheer satisfaction of seeing his family suffer?
It's the feeling of someone you know suddenly acting completely unlike themselves, and you can't shake the unsettling thought that something unseen is pulling their strings. A mainstream historical fact here is that Viking trade routes were extensive, stretching from North America to the Middle East, facilitating the exchange of goods like furs, amber, timber, and silver. These routes, however, were notoriously dangerous, plagued by piracy, treacherous weather, and hostile encounters. For you, the villager, the perils of the journey were well known. But when a seasoned, reputable trader inexplicably disappeared with valuable goods, or a trusted envoy delivered a message that seemed deliberately twisted, it felt like more than just standard occupational hazards. It felt personal, a divine intervention of the worst kind. Here's a quirky tidbit. Loki is famously known for his ability to shapeshift, not just into animals, but also into other people. Now, consider a tale of a lone traveler who joins a group on the road, seemingly friendly and helpful, offering advice or directions. But their advice is subtly wrong, leading the group into a bog or to a dangerous shortcut that turns out to be a dead end. Once the mischief is done, this helpful traveler vanishes without a trace. Was it a misguided local? Or was it Loki, disguised, enjoying the chaos and frustration he had caused, vanishing into the mist, leaving the travelers stranded and bewildered? It's the ultimate bait and switch, but with your very survival as the prize. The dread of Loki's involvement in travelers' treachery wasn't just about losing goods or time, it was about the fundamental erosion of trust. If you couldn't rely on the safety of the roads or the honesty of those you met, it hampered your ability to connect with the wider world. It fostered a deep-seated suspicion of strangers, and even of those you knew, if their behavior on a journey seemed uncharacteristic. It's like your modern navigation system suddenly telling you to turn left into a lake, and you wonder if it's a glitch or if someone's hacked it just to watch you flounder. You'd hear cautionary tales, of course, chilling whispers around the fire, stories of merchants led astray by phantom lights in the fog, only to find themselves lost in uncharted territory. Sailors who swore they saw familiar landmarks, only to discover they were miles off course, as if the very coastlines had shifted overnight. These weren't just folklore, they were perceived as genuine threats, evidence of Loki's capacity to manipulate the very fabric of reality for his own amusement. This constant awareness meant that before any significant journey, elaborate rituals might be performed. Offerings would be made to gods like Njord, the god of seafarers, for safe passage, or to Odin for wisdom on the road. But there might also be subtle, almost whispered appeals to Loki, a request for clear paths or honest encounters, perhaps leaving a small shiny trinket at a crossroads as a diversion, hoping he'd be satisfied with that and leave you and yours alone. It was a desperate attempt to appease the unpredictable, to buy a moment of clarity and safety in a world riddled with unseen dangers. The psychological burden of this constant threat to safe passage was significant. It made every departure a solemn affair, every arrival a moment of profound relief. You learned to be wary, to scrutinize faces, to question narratives that seemed too good or too bad to be true. This pervasive sense that even the journey could be a stage for divine mischief meant that trust was a precious, hard-won commodity. It was a constant reminder that in the Viking world, even when you thought you were battling human foes or natural elements, there might be a trickster god pulling the strings from the shadows, enjoying every moment of your confusion and despair. This quiet anxiety, the feeling that you could be led astray at any moment, was a persistent shadow over every Viking journey.
The long winter night stretches endlessly, and outside, the wind whistles a haunting tune around the longhouse. Inside, huddled by the fire, you find yourself listening to the faint rustling in the thatch above, or the odd, almost human-like sigh from the forest just beyond your walls. It's easy to dismiss these as mere sounds of the night, But for a Viking villager, the line between the natural world and the supernatural was incredibly thin. And when things felt particularly eerie, when phenomena seemed to defy logical explanation, it was often assumed that spirits and shadows were at play, sometimes directly linked to Loki's pervasive influence. In your world, the landscape wasn't just rocks and trees, it was alive with hidden forces. The forests held ancient spirits, the mountains were home to formidable giants, and the very air could carry the whispers of the unseen. You believed in Vetir, land spirits, and a whole host of lesser beings who could be benevolent or malevolent. So when something truly odd happened, a tool inexplicably moving in the night, a chilling, disembodied laugh echoing from an empty clearing, or a sudden, localized patch of cold in a warm room, your mind wouldn't jump to drafts or settling timbers. It would jump to something other. And Loki, with his close ties to the shadowy realms and his delight in unsettling mortals, was often the prime suspect when the supernatural felt particularly mischievous rather than outright hostile. Imagine you're tending to the communal forge, the embers glowing warmly, the air thick with the smell of hot metal. You step out for a moment to fetch more charcoal, and when you return, a newly forged axe head, still hot to the touch, has been inexplicably turned upside down on the anvil. No one else is around. You stare at it, a prickle of unease running down your spine. It wasn't you, you know it. Was it a Holdra, a hidden folk playing a trick? Or was it Loki, perhaps just enjoying a moment of unsettling you, making you question your sanity with a tiny, inexplicable act of rearrangement? It's the feeling of knowing you locked the door, but finding it ajar, and there's no logical explanation. A mainstream historical fact here is that animistic beliefs and a strong connection to the spiritual world were deeply embedded in Viking Age society. Every natural feature, from trees to rivers, was thought to have spirits or a sacred quality. And interactions with these unseen forces were a part of daily life. For you, the villager, navigating this spiritual landscape was as important as navigating the physical one. When the well inexplicably ran dry, or a beloved tree suddenly withered, it wasn't just environmental damage. It was often seen as an act of the Vetir, or perhaps a god like Loki, interfering with the balance. And for a quirky tidbit, Loki is often associated with the concept of seid, a form of Norse magic that involved prophecy, shape-shifting, and influencing minds. While seid was complex and practiced by specific individuals, the idea of such subtle, mind-bending influence often got linked to Loki. Imagine you're walking through a familiar path in the woods, and suddenly the landscape seems to shift, disorienting you. You feel a strange sense of dread, as if unseen eyes are watching. You know the path, but your mind is telling you it's wrong. You eventually find your way, but the experience leaves you shaken. Was it just getting turned around? Or was it Loki, dabbling with seid, creating a temporary illusion, subtly manipulating your perception of reality just to enjoy your confusion and fear? It's like your GPS suddenly telling you to drive into a field, but you're not sure if it's a bug or if your car is possessed. The dread of Loki's hand in these spiritual disturbances wasn't about outright demonic possession. It was about a subtle, unnerving feeling of being manipulated, of how the very fabric of your reality tweaked for someone else's amusement. It meant that even your own senses couldn't always be trusted, that what you saw or heard might not be real, or that an unseen force was playing a game with your mind. It fostered a deep-seated caution, making you question what was truly natural and what was something more. You'd hear stories, chilling whispers exchanged around the fire on long winter nights, tales of strange lights dancing in the marshes where no light should be, of voices carried on the wind calling out names that weren't there,
of objects moving in locked longhouses, leaving no human trace. These weren't just campfire stories. They were accounts of genuine experiences, often attributed to mischievous spirits, or, if they felt particularly malevolent or illogical, to Loki himself. Each tale solidified the belief that the world was far more alive and far more dangerous than it seemed on the surface. This constant awareness of a thin veil between worlds and Loki's propensity to poke holes in it meant that villagers often engaged in small personal acts of spiritual protection. You might leave a bowl of fresh milk for the house vetir to keep them content and prevent Loki from stirring them up. You might wear an amulet with protective runes, not just against human foes, but against unseen mischief. You might even deliberately misdirect your conversation sometimes, speaking vaguely about your plans, just in case a mischievous spirit, or Loki, was listening and decided to interfere. It's like unplugging your webcam when you're talking about sensitive information, but that someone is a trickster god. The psychological burden of this constant awareness of spirits and shadows and Loki's potential role in their antics was that it added a layer of profound mystery and unease to your daily life. It fostered a sense of awe, yes, but also a deep caution. You learned to interpret subtle signs, to listen to whispers on the wind, and to approach the unexplained with a mixture of reverence and fear. This quiet anxiety, the feeling that your world was not entirely your own, that unseen forces were constantly at work, and that one particular god delighted in stirring the pot, was a pervasive undercurrent in your everyday existence in that small Viking village.
The chill of the night deepens, but the fire inside the longhouse remains a comforting beacon. You watch the flames dance, mesmerized by their hypnotic glow, and a thought crosses your mind. Perhaps a small offering, just a little something, might ease the quiet dread of the morning. Because in the face of Loki's relentless, unpredictable mischief, you, a Viking villager, weren't entirely powerless. You turn to offerings and appeals, small acts of ritual and supplication, desperately hoping to appease the trickster god, or, at the very least, divert his mischievous gaze. In your world, the gods weren't just abstract beings, they were forces to be reckoned with, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrifying, and often both. While you might pray to Thor for strength or Freya for a good harvest, Loki presented a unique problem. You couldn't exactly pray to him for good fortune, not in the traditional sense. His nature was too chaotic, too unpredictable. Instead, your appeals to Loki were more akin to subtle bribes, a desperate attempt to say, "Here, have this, and please, just leave us alone." These weren't grand public sacrifices. They were often quiet, personal acts, born of a deep, abiding apprehension. Imagine you've just finished mending a fishing net, a painstaking task that took hours. You've checked every knot, every loop, ensuring its perfection. Before you lay it out to dry, you might take a small, intricate fishing lure, one of your best, and leave it by the riverbank, not thrown in, but placed deliberately, almost hidden under a stone. You whisper a few words, not of thanks, but of acknowledgement. "Here, trickster, a shiny bauble for your amusement. Let this be enough, and spare my nets tonight." It's a desperate gamble, a silent negotiation with a force that thrives on disruption. It's the feeling of leaving a penny on a train track, hoping it will somehow appease the vast, indifferent machine. A mainstream historical fact here is that offerings and sacrifices were integral to Norse religion, ranging from animal sacrifices at large communal blots to personal, smaller offerings made at home or sacred sites. These offerings served various purposes: to honor gods, ensure fertility, seek protection, or gain favor. For you, the villager, while most offerings were directed towards benevolent deities, the specific, almost cautious nature of offerings directed towards Loki highlights his unique and troublesome position in the pantheon. You weren't thanking him for a good harvest, you were implicitly begging him not to ruin it.
And for a quirky tidbit, some interpretations of Loki's character suggest he sometimes helped the gods, albeit often in a convoluted way, or to fix a problem he himself caused. This chaotic help often involved deception or trickery. Imagine you're trying to build a new storage shed, but for days the timber seems cursed. Pieces don't fit, nails bend, and the roof stubbornly refuses to align. You're utterly frustrated. Then, overnight, a crucial beam mysteriously slots into place, perfectly. You stare, bewildered. You didn't do it. Was it a neighbor? Unlikely. Did Loki, in a moment of boredom or bizarre impulse, decide to help you just to prove he could, or perhaps to set up an even greater failure later? It's a moment of confusing relief mixed with profound suspicion, like your annoying sibling suddenly doing your chores for you, and you just know there's a catch. The dread behind these offerings wasn't about pleasing a benevolent deity, it was about managing a volatile one. It was a recognition of Loki's immense power to cause mischief, even if it wasn't outright malice, and a hope that by giving him a small token, you could redirect his attention elsewhere, perhaps towards a less significant target, or, better yet, away from your village entirely. It was a constant, low-level negotiation with the unpredictable. You'd hear stories, of course, of people who didn't appease Loki, or who inadvertently slighted him. Tales of milk cows suddenly falling barren, or of fishing boats inexplicably losing their catch day after day despite perfect conditions. These weren't just random misfortunes. They were seen as Loki's direct retribution for a lack of respect, or perhaps for simply being overlooked. Each story served as a chilling reminder of the importance of these subtle appeals, reinforcing the fear that ignoring him was a far greater risk than making a quiet, almost reluctant gesture. It's like leaving a tip for a notoriously difficult waiter, not because the service was good, but because you want to avoid a spit-in-your-soup scenario. The psychological burden of constantly having to acknowledge and subtly appease a god whose primary characteristic was disruption was unique. It fostered a sense of being perpetually on guard, of constantly needing to read the unseen currents of divine temperament. You couldn't openly worship Loki with the same reverence as Thor or Odin, yet you couldn't ignore him either. This delicate balance, this quiet dance of cautious respect and underlying fear shaped many of your decisions. This quiet anxiety, the feeling that your daily well-being hinged on these small, often superstitious acts of appeasement to an unpredictable god, was a defining, if often unspoken, aspect of your life in that small Viking village.
The first hint of dawn paints the eastern sky, and you emerge from the longhouse, drawing a deep breath of the crisp morning air. Despite the constant undercurrent of unease, despite the knowledge that Loki's shadow still stretches long across your world, you find yourself preparing for another day. You gather your tools, greet your neighbors, and set about your tasks with a quiet determination. Because underlying all the fear and apprehension, there was the enduring spirit of the Viking people, a profound resilience that allowed them to live and thrive despite Loki's constant presence, adapting, enduring, and finding strength in community. Life in a Viking village wasn't just about battling the elements or appeasing mischievous gods. It was about living. It was about the laughter of children, the warmth of the fire, the satisfaction of hard work, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. While Loki might cause frustration, accidents, or even localized disasters, he rarely, if ever, managed to truly break the spirit of the people. You didn't give in to despair. You found ways to cope, to mitigate, and to simply carry on. This wasn't about ignoring the threats. It was about integrating them into your worldview and finding strength within that understanding. Imagine your most beloved tool, a finely crafted axe passed down through generations, suddenly develops a mysterious crack in its handle. A moment of panic, a whisper of Loki's hand. But then you don't simply discard it.
You carefully select a new piece of wood. Spend hours painstakingly carving and fitting a replacement handle, perhaps inscribing a protective rune onto it as you work. The axe is restored, perhaps even stronger than before, a testament to your perseverance. This is not defiance of Loki, but a quiet, tenacious refusal to let his mischief completely derail your life. It's the feeling of your computer crashing, losing hours of work, and instead of giving up, you take a deep breath, rebuild, and maybe invest in a good backup system. A mainstream historical fact here is that Viking society was incredibly adaptable and resilient, flourishing in harsh environments and expanding across vast geographical regions. Their innovations in shipbuilding, navigation, and social organization allowed them to overcome immense challenges. For you, the villager, this wasn't just abstract historical progress. It was your lived experience. You learned from every setback, you improvised, and you found communal solutions to problems, whether they were caused by nature or by a mischievous deity. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some Norse traditions, Loki is depicted as having quite a sharp tongue, capable of witty, albeit often cruel insults and riddles. Imagine a particularly frustrating day where everything has gone wrong. Your roof leaks, your best fishing line snaps, and the bread burns. You're exhausted and irritable. Instead of just raging, you might, under your breath, compose a short, sarcastic little verse aimed directly at Loki. A tiny act of verbal defiance, a way of venting your frustration without overtly challenging him. It's not a prayer, but a conversational jab, a way to acknowledge his presence without letting him entirely win. It's like when your friend constantly pranks you, and your only recourse is to roast them back with a perfectly timed dry comeback. A small victory, but a satisfying one.
The enduring spirit in the face of Loki's influence wasn't about denying his power. It was about acknowledging it and choosing not to let it paralyze you. It fostered a practical fatalism. If it's Loki's will, it will happen. But that doesn't mean I won't try my best anyway. This mindset allowed you to maintain your focus on the tasks at hand, to continue building, growing, and trading, even with that background hum of divine mischief. It's a powerful psychological coping mechanism, a way of refusing to be entirely cowed by the unpredictable. You'd see it in the communal effort against Loki's influence wasn't about denying his power. It was about acknowledging it and choosing not to let it paralyze you. It fostered a practical fatalism. If it's Loki's will, it will happen. But that doesn't mean I won't try my best anyway. This mindset allowed you to maintain your focus on the tasks at hand, to continue building, growing, and trading, even with that background hum of divine mischief. It's a powerful psychological coping mechanism, a way of refusing to be entirely cowed by the unpredictable. You'd see it in the communal effort after a storm attributed to Loki, as everyone pitched in to repair damaged longhouses and secure lost animals. You'd witness it in the blacksmith meticulously reforging a tool that had inexplicably broken. You'd feel it in the shared laughter when someone recounted a particularly frustrating but ultimately harmless Loki moment, turning potential despair into a source of grim humor. These were the moments when the community truly shone, showing that while Loki could cause trouble, he couldn't break the collective will. This resilience was also deeply tied to your faith in other, more benevolent gods. While Loki might cause problems, you knew that Odin provided wisdom, Thor offered strength and protection, and Freyr ensured fertility. These gods balanced Loki's chaos, providing a framework of order and meaning within which you could operate. Your offerings and prayers to them were not just about personal gain, but about reinforcing the cosmic balance, strengthening the forces of order against the forces of chaos that Loki embodied.
It's like having a highly effective IT department that could fix the problems caused by a constantly mischievous intern. The practical response to Loki's presence was often to become more resourceful, more prepared. If he might spoil a harvest, you'd try to cultivate multiple fields or find alternative food sources. If he might mislead a traveler, you'd pack extra provisions and study the landmarks even more carefully. His very existence pushed you to be better, to be more resilient, to adapt. It's a strange silver lining, isn't it? The ultimate pain-in-the-butt god forcing you to level up your entire existence. The psychological legacy of Loki's constant mischievous presence was not one of utter despair, but of a quiet, stubborn strength. It taught you to find humor in absurdity, to rely more deeply on your community, and to approach life with a pragmatic blend of caution and determination. You learned that while you couldn't control the whims of the gods, you could control your response to them. This enduring spirit, this quiet resilience in the face of unpredictable divine interference, was the true hallmark of your life in that small, thriving village. Now, as the quiet of the night deepens and the echoes of Viking life begin to fade, allow yourself to drift. The stories of Loki's mischief, of daily fears, and enduring spirits can gently recede into the realm of dreams. Let the sounds of the fire, the imagined distant ocean waves, or the soft hum of your fan lull you further. Release any lingering thoughts, any worries that might cling to the edges of your mind. Tonight, there are no mischievous gods, no tasks to complete, only the promise of deep, peaceful rest. Feel the weight of your body settling, softening into the comfort of your bed. The ancient world has receded. Now only stillness remains. Breathe deeply, slowly, and let yourself float completely relaxed into the quiet embrace of sleep.